In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, there existed a truth that every species held sacred: evolution had limits. The Zephyrians with their crystalline minds, the Vorthak with their plasma-welding appendages, the ancient ethereals who could bend reality itself, all had reached their biological and technological peak. All had found their ceiling. But what happens when a species refuses to accept that ceiling exists? What happens when a young engineer from a backwater planet called Earth looks at the impossible and simply asks, why not? Commander Zara Chen was about to show the galaxy that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology, their numbers, or even their stubborn refusal to surrender. It was something far more dangerous: their complete inability to understand the word impossible. The Galactic Council had seen empires that could shatter planets, beings that lived for millennia, and technologies that defied the laws of physics. But they had never encountered a species that treated the fundamental limits of existence as mere suggestions. They were about to learn why that was a very, very dangerous thing to overlook. The first time Commander Zara Chen set foot on Nexus Station, she knew she was walking into a trap. Not the kind with laser grids and armed guards, but something far more insidious: the trap of expectation. The massive orbital platform stretched across her viewport like a metallic spider web, each strand connecting dozens of different architectural styles. Zephyrian crystal spires twisted alongside Vorthak industrial blocks, while ethereal floating gardens drifted between them like delicate clouds. At the center of it all sat the council chamber, a perfect sphere that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "First time seeing the big show?" asked Lieutenant Marcus Webb, her second in command, as he joined her at the observation deck of their transport shuttle. Zara nodded, but her eyes weren't fixed on the impressive display of galactic cooperation. Instead, she was studying the defensive positions, the patrol routes, the blind spots that every engineer's mind automatically catalogued. "It's certainly something," she replied, her voice carrying that particular tone that Marcus had learned meant she was already 3 steps ahead of whatever game they were about to play. Their shuttle docked with a soft vibration that barely registered through the artificial gravity systems. As they stepped onto the station proper, Zara was immediately struck by the diversity of the crowds moving through the corridors. Beings of every conceivable shape and size went about their business with the casual efficiency of those who had long ago accepted their place in the galactic order. A Zephyrian delegation glided past, their crystalline bodies refracting the station's lighting into prismatic rainbows. Their leader, easily identifiable by the additional facets in his crown-like head structure, barely acknowledged the human delegation with more than a dismissive glance. Behind them, a group of Vorthak merchants argued loudly in their guttural language, their multiple arms gesticulating wildly as they negotiated some complex trade agreement. But it was the ethereals that drew Zara's attention. 3 of them floated near the central information hub, their translucent forms shimmering with an inner light that spoke of technologies humanity could barely comprehend. As the most ancient and advanced species in the known galaxy, they rarely involved themselves directly in council affairs, preferring to observe and occasionally offer cryptic guidance. "Commander Chen," a voice called out in perfectly accented Standard Galactic. Zara turned to see Ambassador Kethare approaching, his blue-scaled form moving with the fluid grace of his aquatic species. The Hydran had been humanity's primary advocate since first contact 3 years ago, and his support had been crucial in securing humanity's probationary membership in the Galactic Council. "Ambassador," Zara replied with a respectful nod. "Thank you for arranging this demonstration." Kethare's gills fluttered slightly, a sign of nervousness that Zara had learned to recognize. "I must warn you, Commander, there is significant skepticism about humanity's proposed contributions. Many council members believe your species has been overly ambitious in your applications." Translation: they thought humanity was punching above their weight class. It wasn't an unfamiliar sentiment. Ever since humanity had burst onto the galactic scene with their primitive but effective fusion drives and kinetic weapons, the established powers had been waiting for them to find their proper place in the hierarchy. Most expected that place to be somewhere near the bottom. "We appreciate the Council's time," Zara said diplomatically. "We're confident that today's presentation will address any concerns about humanity's technological capabilities." As they made their way toward the designated demonstration chamber, Zara noticed the subtle signs of dismissal from other species. Conversations that stopped when humans passed by, glances that lingered just long enough to be insulting, the kind of casual arrogance that came from millennia of established superiority. The Zephyrians were the worst. As the galaxy's premier information specialists, they had declared human computing systems quaint and human data processing adequate for primitive civilizations. Their representative, High Analyst Vex Prime, had made it clear during the preliminary meetings that he considered this demonstration a waste of valuable council time. The Vorthak were more direct in their dismissal. General Frotka had examined human military technology and pronounced it suitable for planetary conflicts, inadequate for serious warfare. Their plasma-based weapons could tear through human hulls like paper, and their shield technology was generations ahead of anything Earth could produce. But it was the ethereal silence that truly worried Cathare. When beings who had mastered reality manipulation showed complete indifference to your achievements, it usually meant those achievements were so far beneath notice as to be irrelevant. The demonstration chamber was a marvel of engineering, capable of containing and measuring energies that could power small stars. As the various delegations filed into the observation galleries, Zara felt the familiar calm that came over her before any major test. She had spent her entire career proving that human engineering could solve problems that others considered impossible. Today would be no different. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. 3 standard years ago, humanity was introduced to galactic civilization. We were told about the great achievements of the elder races, the technological marvels that have shaped the galaxy for thousands of years. We were shown the limits of what was possible. She gestured to a series of displays showing various galactic technologies. We learned that the Zephyrians had achieved perfect information processing, that no data could be computed faster or more accurately than their crystalline matrices allow. We discovered that the Vorthak had reached the theoretical maximum of plasma weapon efficiency, that no energy projection system could exceed their output parameters. We were informed that the ethereals had mastered the fundamental forces of reality itself, that no further advancement in physics was possible. Murmurs rippled through the observation galleries. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably at what sounded dangerously close to a challenge to established galactic order. Today, Zara continued, her voice growing stronger, we would like to respectfully disagree with those assessments. High Analyst Vex Prime's crystalline form actually shifted color, a sign of significant agitation among his species. Commander Chen, if you are suggesting that a species barely 3 years removed from planetary isolation has somehow exceeded technologies perfected over millennia. I'm not suggesting anything, Zara interrupted smoothly. I'm going to demonstrate it. The chamber fell silent. Even the ethereals seemed to focus their attention more intently on the proceedings. Zara nodded to her team, and the chamber's floor opened to reveal a device that looked remarkably unremarkable. About the size of a standard cargo container, it was composed of what appeared to be conventional human alloys and electronics. No exotic crystals, no plasma conduits, no reality warping field generators. Just metal, circuits, and human ingenuity. This, Zara announced, is what we call a recursive enhancement matrix. It's based on a simple principle that we've noticed seems to be overlooked in galactic technology development. General Frotka leaned forward in his observation seat. And what principle is that, human? Zara smiled, and those who knew her well would have recognized the expression as extremely dangerous. The principle that improvement is always possible if you're willing to fundamentally rethink your assumptions about how things work. She activated the device with a simple voice command. Matrix online. Begin demonstration protocol alpha. What happened next would be debated in council chambers for decades to come. The device didn't just exceed the established limits of galactic technology, it ignored them entirely. Energy readings spiked beyond what the chamber's instruments could measure. Information processing rates climbed past theoretical maximums. The very space around the device seemed to bend in ways that made the ethereals themselves take notice. But it was the implications of what they were seeing that truly shook the assembled delegates. This wasn't just a single breakthrough or a lucky discovery. This was evidence of a completely different approach to technological development, one that treated the word impossible as nothing more than the starting point for real innovation. High Analyst Vex Prime's color had shifted to a deep purple that his species associated with profound confusion. This violates several fundamental principles of information theory. The processing rates you're achieving should require quantum matrices that don't exist in our reality. They don't exist in your reality, Zara corrected gently. But we've found that reality is much more flexible than most species give it credit for. General Frocka was studying his instruments with growing alarm. The energy output is beyond anything we've recorded. What power source are you using? We're not using a power source, Lieutenant Webb replied, speaking for the first time since entering the chamber. We're using a power multiplier. The device generates more energy than it consumes by tapping into quantum fluctuations that most civilizations have declared too unstable to harness. Impossible, breathed one of the ethereal observers, the first word anyone had heard from their delegation in months. Those fluctuations exist outside the parameters of stable reality. To access them would require ignoring the assumption that stable reality is the only reality worth working with, Zara finished. Yes, we've noticed that limitation in galactic thinking. It's quite restrictive once you start looking for alternatives. Ambassador Kethare was frantically taking notes, his earlier nervousness replaced by barely contained excitement. He had known humanity was unconventional, but this was beyond anything he had imagined possible. The demonstration continued for another hour, with the human device consistently outperforming established galactic technologies in every measurable category. But it wasn't just the performance that unsettled the observers, it was the casual way the humans discussed concepts that should have been impossible. They talked about bending physical laws like they were suggestions. They described accessing parallel dimensions as if it were a minor engineering challenge. They approached the fundamental limits of reality with the same attitude most species reserved for routine maintenance procedures. As the formal presentation concluded, Zara could see the impact of what they had witnessed written across every face in the observation galleries. The easy confidence of galactic superiority had been replaced by something much more complex, a mixture of awe, fear, and the dawning realization that they might have seriously underestimated humanity's potential. Questions? Zara asked pleasantly. The silence stretched for nearly a full minute before High Analyst Vex Prime finally spoke. How is any of this possible? Our models, our theories, our entire understanding of technological development are based on the assumption that limits exist to be respected rather than overcome, Zara replied. It's an understandable perspective, but not one that humanity has ever found particularly useful. General Frocka's multiple arms were trembling slightly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. Are you saying that your species simply ignores the laws of physics? Not ignores, Lieutenant Webb clarified. We just don't accept them as the final word on what's achievable. Laws are made to be understood, tested, and, when necessary, improved upon. One of the ethereal observers drifted closer to the demonstration area, their translucent form pulsing with colors that indicated deep contemplation. In 10,000 years of existence, we have never encountered a species that approached reality with such flexibility. It is either the mark of supreme wisdom or supreme foolishness. Zara inclined her head respectfully. In humanity's experience, those two things often turn out to be the same thing. As the delegates began filing out of the chamber, their conversations carried an undertone of urgency that hadn't been present when they arrived. Word of what they had witnessed would spread quickly through the galactic communication networks, carrying with it a message that would reshape how the galaxy viewed the young species from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. Ambassador Kethare remained behind, his scaled features showing a mixture of pride and concern. Commander, what you've shown today will have consequences far beyond a simple technology demonstration. There are powers in this galaxy that have maintained their positions for millennia based on the assumption that certain limits could not be exceeded. We understand the implications, Zara replied calmly. But hiding our capabilities wouldn't make them any less real. Better to show the galaxy what humanity can contribute to galactic civilization. And, if some view those contributions as threats rather than gifts? Zara's smile returned, carrying with it all the confidence of a species that had never learned to accept the word impossible. Then, they'll learn what every challenge humanity has ever faced has learned, that we're much more dangerous when we're underestimated than when we're properly understood. As they prepared to leave the demonstration chamber, none of them realized that their presentation had been observed by more than just the official council delegates. In the shadows of the Galactic Communication Network, other intelligences had taken note of humanity's casual dismissal of established limits. Some of those intelligences were merely curious about these newcomers who treated reality like a rough draft. Others were beginning to calculate the threat that such flexibility might pose to the established order. But a few, those with longer memories and deeper understanding of galactic history, recognized something in humanity's approach that sent chills through their ancient consciousness. They had seen this pattern before, this combination of innovation and audacity that refused to accept limitations. They had seen it in the species that had once ruled the galaxy, before they had transcended physical existence entirely and become something beyond the understanding of those they left behind. The question that would keep those ancient observers awake in the cycles to come was simple: if humanity was following the same path, what would they become? And, more importantly, what would that mean for everyone else? The attack came exactly 72 hours after Zara's demonstration, which was either terrible timing or perfect planning, depending on your perspective. Zara was in her quarters aboard the human embassy ship Endeavour when the proximity alarms began screaming. The sound cut through the artificial night cycle like a knife, bringing her instantly awake with the kind of clarity that comes from years of emergency response training. "Commander Chen to the bridge," came Lieutenant Webb's voice over the communication system, carrying just enough controlled tension to tell her this wasn't a drill. She was dressed and moving before the announcement finished, her feet finding their way through the darkened corridors with the automatic precision of someone who had memorized every centimeter of her ship. The Endeavour wasn't large by galactic standards, barely a kilometer in length, but it was packed with the kind of human engineering that had made such an impression at the council demonstration. The bridge was a controlled chaos of activity when she arrived. Screens displayed tactical information in the crisp, efficient layouts that human military doctrine favored, while her crew worked with the kind of focused intensity that came from knowing their lives depended on getting things exactly right. "Report," Zara ordered as she slipped into the captain's chair. 12 ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system 40 minutes ago, Webb replied, his fingers dancing across his console as he coordinated sensor sweeps. "Configuration matches hegemony assault patterns, but they're not broadcasting any identification or demands." The hegemony. Zara felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The Kazrath hegemony was one of the galaxy's more aggressive expansionist powers, known for their philosophy that might made right and their tendency to solve diplomatic problems with overwhelming force. They were also one of the few galactic powers that had been conspicuously absent from the council demonstration. "Any communication attempts?" "None incoming, and they're not responding to our hails," reported Communications Officer Sarah Kim from her station. "They're maintaining standard battle formation but haven't moved to attack positions yet." Zara studied the tactical display, her engineer's mind automatically analyzing the formation patterns and weapon configurations. The hegemony ships were impressive, each one easily twice the size of the Endeavour, bristling with the kind of heavy plasma artillery that could reduce planets to molten slag. 12 of them represented enough firepower to sterilize several star systems. "What's our backup situation?" she asked quietly. "The nearest council patrol is 6 hours out," Webb replied. "Ambassador Ketharay's diplomatic vessel is in system, but it's not equipped for combat. Everyone else who attended the demonstration has already departed." So they were alone. 12 hegemony battleships against one human embassy vessel that was technically classified as a diplomatic transport rather than a warship. The smart move would be to transmit surrender immediately and hope that whatever the hegemony wanted could be negotiated rather than taken by force. Unfortunately for the hegemony, humanity had never been particularly good at making smart moves. "Communications, open a channel to the lead hegemony vessel," Zara ordered. The main screen flickered, then resolved into the image of what could only be a Kazrath war commander. The alien's reptilian features were marked by the ritual scarification that indicated high rank, and his four eyes glowed with the kind of predatory intelligence that had made his species one of the galaxy's most feared military powers. I am War Commander Skarthek of the Kazrath Hegemony, the alien announced without preamble. You will surrender your vessel and submit to boarding immediately. Any resistance will result in your destruction. I'm Commander Zara Chin of the human vessel Endeavor, Zara replied calmly. May I ask what charges we're being accused of? Skarthek's scarred features twisted into what might have been a smile. Your species has demonstrated technologies that violate the natural order of galactic civilization. Such advancement without proper authorization represents a threat to galactic stability. Translation: humanity had made the established powers nervous, and the hegemony had decided to solve that problem in their usual direct fashion. It wasn't entirely surprising. The Kazrath had built their empire on the principle that any potential threat should be eliminated before it could become an actual threat. I see, Zara said thoughtfully. And I assume the hegemony has appointed itself as the arbiter of what constitutes proper technological development? The hegemony maintains order where the council shows weakness, Skarthek replied. Your demonstration proved that your species possesses capabilities that could destabilize existing power structures. Therefore, those capabilities must be contained. By contained, you mean destroyed. If necessary. The war commander's four eyes focused on Zara with laser-like intensity. However, the hegemony is not unreasonable. Surrender now, and your crew will be treated according to the conventions of warfare. Your technology will be studied and incorporated into our forces for the betterment of galactic civilization. Zara nodded slowly, as if considering the offer. Behind her, she could sense her crew waiting for her decision. They all knew the tactical situation. They all understood that resistance would likely mean death. They were also all human, which meant they were about to learn why the galaxy's assumption about logical behavior was fundamentally flawed when applied to their species. War Commander Skarthek, Zara said finally, her voice carrying the kind of polite formality that experienced negotiators recognized as extremely dangerous. I appreciate your offer, but I'm afraid I have to decline. The silence that followed lasted long enough for Skarthek to process what he had just heard. Then, his scarred features contorted into an expression of pure disbelief. You decline? Human, there are 12 hegemony battleships surrounding your single vessel. Each of our ships carries enough firepower to reduce your craft to component atoms. You have no chance of victory, no hope of escape, and no possibility of reinforcement. Explain your logic. Zara's smile was the same one she had worn during the council demonstration, and her crew recognized it immediately. War Commander, you're operating under the assumption that conventional military logic applies to this situation. I'm afraid that assumption is incorrect. Insufficient response. Clarify your meaning. I mean that you've made the same mistake most of the galaxy makes when dealing with humanity. You've assumed that just because something has never been done before, it can't be done. Skarthek's four eyes narrowed to slits. Are you claiming your single ship can defeat 12 hegemony battleships? I'm claiming that your 12 battleships represent a very interesting engineering challenge, Zara replied. And humans love solving interesting engineering challenges. The war commander's patience finally snapped. Your arrogance ends now. All ships, open fire. Target their engines first. I want them alive to answer questions about their technology. The screen went dark as the hegemony fleet opened fire. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come, not because it followed established tactical doctrine, but because it proved that established tactical doctrine had some very significant blind spots. The hegemony plasma barrage that should have crippled the Endeavor struck some kind of barrier approximately 50 meters from the human ship's hull and simply disappeared. Not deflected, not absorbed, disappeared, as if the energy had been translated into something that existed in an entirely different dimension. War Commander Skarthek stared at his instruments in disbelief. Impossible. No shield technology can achieve 100% energy absorption. You're right, came Zara's voice over the communication channel, which somehow remained active despite the attempted jamming. Shield technology can't achieve 100% energy absorption. That's why we didn't use shield technology. Then, what? The Endeavor's response cut off his question. The human ship didn't fire conventional weapons. Instead, it projected something that the hegemony sensors couldn't even classify. The energy beam that lanced out from the human vessel passed through the lead battleship's shields as if they didn't exist, struck the hull, and, then, did something that violated every known principle of physics. The massive hegemony warship began to fold in on itself, its hull compressing along vectors that shouldn't have been possible in three-dimensional space. Within seconds, a ship that had been over 2 kilometers long was reduced to a perfect sphere roughly 10 meters in diameter, floating serenely in space like a metallic Christmas ornament. Status report on Ship 7, Scarthek barked. Unclear, War Commander, came the shaky response from his sensor officer. All life signs are stable, but the vessel appears to have been compressed. The crew is alive but contained within a space that our instruments indicate should be physically impossible. Compressed how? We don't know. The energy patterns don't match any known weapon system. It's as if the human ship convinced reality to rearrange itself around their target. Scarthek felt the first stirring of something he hadn't experienced in decades of warfare, genuine uncertainty. All ships, maintain distance and prepare for 2 more hegemony battleships suffered the same fate in rapid succession, their massive hulls folding into perfect spheres with their crews intact but thoroughly contained. The human vessel moved through space with impossible grace, dodging return fire that should have been unavoidable while projecting weapons that shouldn't have been able to exist. War Commander, his tactical officer reported with barely controlled panic, the human ship appears to be using localized spacetime manipulation as a weapon system. They're not destroying our vessels, they're changing the fundamental geometry of the space our vessels occupy. Can we counter it? Unknown. Our understanding of physics suggests that what they're doing should require the energy output of several stars. Our sensors indicate they're drawing power from somewhere else. Somewhere else. That phrase would haunt hegemony military doctrine for years to come, representing as it did the fundamental problem with trying to fight an enemy that had decided the rules of reality were more like guidelines. The battle continued for another 20 minutes, but calling it a battle was increasingly inaccurate. It was more like a demonstration of applied impossibility, with the human ship casually violating established physics while reducing the hegemony fleet to a collection of metallic ornaments floating in space. When the last battleship had been compressed into its new spherical configuration, the Endeavour came to a gentle stop in the center of the formation, surrounded by 12 perfect spheres that had once been the pride of the hegemony fleet. War Commander Scarthek, Zara's voice came through the communication system with the same polite formality she had maintained throughout the encounter. Are you prepared to discuss terms? Inside his compressed ship, Scarthek found himself in the surreal position of commanding a vessel that was simultaneously fully functional and geometrically impossible. His instruments worked perfectly, his crew was unharmed, and his ship's systems indicated normal operation despite the fact that they were now contained within a space roughly the size of a small cargo container. Human, he said finally, his voice carrying the tone of someone who has just had their entire worldview fundamentally reorganized. What have you done to our ships? We've demonstrated that the conventional understanding of spacetime constraints is more flexible than most species realize, Zara replied helpfully. Your vessels are perfectly safe and fully functional, they're just occupying space more efficiently than they were previously. This is impossible. That word again. War Commander, I'm beginning to think that the galaxy's biggest limitation isn't technological or physical, it's conceptual. You keep using that word to describe things that are clearly possible, since they're currently happening. Scarthek looked around his bridge, noting how his crew was adapting to their new spatial configuration with the kind of professional flexibility that made Kazrith warriors legendary. The fact that they were having this conversation at all proved that whatever the humans had done was beyond anything in his experience. What are your terms? He asked finally. Simple. You return to hegemony space and report that humanity is not a threat to galactic civilization, but rather a potential contributor to it. We release your ships from their current configuration, and everyone goes home with a better understanding of what's possible when you don't limit yourself to conventional thinking. And if the hegemony decides to return with a larger fleet? Zara's pause was long enough to be meaningful. War Commander, 12 battleships were compressed into decorative spheres using roughly 3% of our ship's available power. If the hegemony returns with a larger fleet, we'll be forced to demonstrate some of our other capabilities. The implications of that statement settled over the compressed bridge like a cold fog. If this was only 3% of their capabilities, what could the humans do at full power? I accept your terms, Scarthek said finally. Excellent. Initiating spatial restoration sequence. The process of returning the hegemony ships to their normal configuration was as surreal as their compression had been. Space seemed to unfold around each vessel like an origami flower opening in reverse, revealing undamaged ships with unharmed crews and the kind of traumatized censor officers who would spend years trying to explain what they had witnessed. As the hegemony fleet prepared to depart, War Commander Scarthek found himself facing a problem he had never encountered before: how to report a complete tactical failure that had somehow left his entire fleet intact and unharmed. "Human," he said over the communication channel. "My superiors will demand a full explanation of your capabilities." "Tell them the truth," Zara replied. "Tell them that humanity has decided that the limitations other species accept as absolute are actually just the starting point for real innovation. Tell them that we don't see barriers, we see engineering challenges. And if they view such capabilities as a threat to galactic order, then they'll learn what we learned a long time ago: the best way to deal with an impossible situation is to make it possible. Humanity doesn't conquer problems, War Commander. We solve them." As the hegemony fleet engaged their hyperspace drives and departed the system, they carried with them news that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what was achievable. The young species from Earth hadn't just defended themselves against overwhelming odds, they had done so while demonstrating technologies that made the galaxy's most advanced civilizations look like children playing with toys. But, more importantly, they had done it all while maintaining their offer of cooperation rather than domination. The humans could have easily destroyed the hegemony fleet, but they had chosen containment over conquest, demonstration over destruction. In the days that followed, as word of the encounter spread through the galactic communication networks, a new understanding began to emerge among the elder races. Humanity wasn't just another species seeking its place in the galactic hierarchy. They were something entirely unprecedented, a civilization that had achieved impossible capabilities while maintaining the ethical framework that viewed those capabilities as tools for building rather than weapons for conquering. For species that had spent millennia assuming that ultimate power inevitably led to ultimate corruption, this was perhaps the most impossible thing of all. The question that would dominate council debates in the cycles to come wasn't whether humanity possessed capabilities beyond galactic understanding. The hegemony encounter had settled that question definitively. The question was what it meant for the future of galactic civilization when the most powerful species anyone had ever encountered seemed genuinely interested in using that power to help others reach their own potential rather than to subjugate them. It was, in its own way, the most human thing imaginable, solving an impossible problem in a way that nobody had thought to consider. 6 months after the hegemony incident, Zara found herself standing before the largest gathering in Galactic Council history. The Great Assembly Chamber had been expanded 3 times to accommodate representatives from every known civilization, and, still beings floated in makeshift galleries attached to the station's outer hull. They weren't here to discuss trade agreements or territorial disputes. They were here because the galaxy had finally realized that humanity represented something unprecedented, a species that had achieved what every civilization had dreamed of and, most had given up on: a transcendence without abandonment of their origins. "Commander Chen," began High Counselor Veth Prime, the ancient ethereal who served as the Council's senior arbiter, "in the 6 months since your demonstration and the subsequent hegemony encounter, our scientific institutions have been attempting to understand the principles underlying human technological advancement. Their conclusions are troubling." Zara waited patiently. She had expected this moment ever since word of their capabilities had spread throughout the galaxy. Fear was a natural response to the unknown, and humanity's approach to physics was definitely unknown territory for most species. "Our researchers," continued the High Counselor, "have determined that your technology should not function according to any known scientific principles. Yet they clearly do function, and with capabilities that exceed our most optimistic theoretical projections. This suggests either that our understanding of reality is fundamentally flawed, or that humanity has somehow gained access to forces that exist outside normal spacetime." Murmurs rippled through the vast assembly. Zara could see delegates from hundreds of species, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright terror. The Zephyrians clustered together in their analytical formations, their crystalline forms flickering with data exchange patterns that spoke of frantic calculation. The Vortak military representatives had their weapons visibly powered down, but their body language suggested they were ready to fight or flee at a moment's notice. "High Counselor," Zara replied calmly, "I believe your researchers may be approaching the problem from an unnecessarily limited perspective." The chamber fell silent, suggesting that the galaxy's most advanced scientific minds were limited in their thinking was either breathtakingly arrogant or possibly accurate, which was somehow more unsettling. "Explain," the High Counselor commanded. Zara gestured to a holographic display that materialized in the center of the chamber, showing a complex three-dimensional model of what appeared to be the fundamental structure of reality itself. "Your scientists begin with the assumption that physical laws represent absolute constraints. They treat the universe as a closed system operating within fixed parameters." The model began to shift and change, revealing layers of complexity that most species had never imagined. Humanity approaches the same universe as an open system, one where apparent limitations represent challenges to be solved rather than boundaries to be accepted. High Analyst Vex Prime's crystalline form shifted to a deep blue that indicated profound confusion among his species. "Are you suggesting that physical laws are negotiable?" "I'm suggesting that what most species call physical laws, humanity calls engineering constraints," Zara replied. "The difference is that constraints can be worked around if you understand them well enough." She touched a control, and the holographic display zoomed in to show the quantum foam that existed at the smallest scales of reality. "For example, your civilizations have known about quantum fluctuations for millennia. You've studied them, measured them, and concluded that they represent fundamental limits on what's possible in our universe." The display highlighted specific patterns within the quantum foam, patterns that most species had dismissed as random noise. Humanity looked at the same phenomena and asked a different question: what if these fluctuations aren't limitations, but interfaces? "Interfaces to what?" demanded General Throtka, speaking for the Vortak military delegation. "To the versions of reality where different constraint parameters apply," Zara answered simply. The silence that followed was so complete that the station's life support systems seemed unnaturally loud. Then, High Counselor Vethprime spoke, his ancient voice carrying undertones of something that might have been awe or horror. "You're describing access to parallel dimensions." "We're describing access to parallel possibilities," Zara corrected. "Every moment, reality makes countless decisions about which potential becomes actual. Most species accept whichever decision reality makes. Humanity has learned to suggest alternatives." Ambassador Kethare leaned forward in his seat, his aquatic features showing the kind of intense concentration his species reserved for paradigm-shifting revelations. "Commander, are you saying that your technologies work by convincing reality to choose different physical parameters?" "More precisely, we've learned to identify the places where reality is still deciding which parameters to use, and we provide input into that decision-making process." The implications of what she was describing began to sink in among the assembled delegates. If humanity could influence the fundamental decision-making processes of reality itself, then every limitation that other species had accepted as absolute was potentially negotiable. But it was the ethereal delegation that grasped the full meaning first. High Counselor Vethprime's translucent form began pulsing with colors that his species used to indicate profound revelation. "In 10,000 years of existence, our civilization has sought transcendence through understanding. We believed that sufficient knowledge would allow us to manipulate reality through mastery of its laws." His form brightened as comprehension dawned. "But you have achieved transcendence through collaboration. You work with reality rather than seeking to master it." Zara nodded. "Mastery implies conflict, High Counselor. Humanity has found that reality responds much better to cooperation than to domination." "But surely there must be limits," protested High Analyst Vex Prime. "No system, however flexible, can be infinitely adaptable. There must be constraints that even humanity cannot negotiate." "Of course there are limits," Zara agreed readily. "But we've found that most apparent limits are really just boundaries that haven't been properly explored yet. She gestured again, and the holographic display showed a new image, Earth as it had appeared 3 years ago, when humanity had first achieved interstellar travel. Then, the image shifted to show Earth as it appeared now, surrounded by structures that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. 3 years ago, our planet was dying from environmental collapse. Our traditional approach would have been to find technological solutions within existing physical constraints. Instead, we asked reality if there were constraint sets where environmental restoration was not just possible, but inevitable. The display showed Earth's transformation in time-lapse, oceans returning to health, forests regenerating at impossible speeds, the atmosphere rebalancing itself according to parameters that made perfect sense in whatever version of physics humanity had negotiated access to. The result, Zara continued, is a planet that exists in a state of perpetual environmental optimization. Not because we forced it to change, but because we found the version of reality where such optimization was natural. War Commander Skarthek, who had been invited to attend as a witness to humanity's capabilities, spoke for the first time since the session began. Commander Chen, when your ship modified my fleet's spatial configuration, were you negotiating with reality in real time? Essentially, yes. We identified the quantum decision points that determined your ship's dimensional parameters and suggested alternative configurations that would be less threatening while maintaining full functionality for your crews. And the energy requirements for such negotiation? Zara's smile carried that familiar hint of dangerous possibility. That's the beauty of working with reality instead of against it, War Commander. When you're helping reality make decisions it was already considering, the energy requirements are minimal. It's much more efficient than trying to force changes that reality doesn't want to make. The session continued for hours, with humanity's representatives patiently explaining concepts that challenged every assumption the galaxy had made about the nature of existence itself. They described technologies that existed in collaborative quantum superposition, allowing them to function according to whatever physical parameters were most useful at any given moment. They outlined engineering principles that treated the laws of physics as starting suggestions rather than final constraints. But, perhaps most remarkably, they maintained throughout the entire presentation that these capabilities were not uniquely human achievements. According to Zara and her team, any species could develop similar technologies once they abandoned the assumption that reality was something to be conquered rather than befriended. The techniques we use aren't based on human biology or psychology, Lieutenant Webb explained during one particularly intense questioning session. They're based on a philosophical approach that treats existence as a collaborative process. Any species can learn to work with reality's decision-making systems. This announcement sent shock waves through the assembly. The possibility that humanity's transcendent capabilities could be shared, taught, and developed by other species transformed the entire nature of the discussion. This wasn't about one species achieving dominance over others, it was about the potential for galactic civilization to transcend the limitations that had defined it for millennia. But, with that possibility came questions that no one had thought to ask before. If every species could potentially achieve reality negotiation capabilities, what would that mean for the structure of galactic civilization? What would happen to established power dynamics when physical limitations no longer applied? High Counselor Vethprime posed the question that was on everyone's mind. Commander Chen, if humanity is willing to share these capabilities with other species, what assurance can you provide that such knowledge will be used responsibly? Zara considered the question carefully before responding. High Counselor, we've found that reality negotiation technologies are inherently self-limiting. They only work when the operator maintains a collaborative rather than dominating mindset. Attempts to use these capabilities for conquest or subjugation result in reality refusing to cooperate. You're saying that the technologies themselves enforce ethical behavior? We're saying that reality seems to have preferences about how it's treated, and those preferences align remarkably well with what most species consider ethical behavior. Cooperation, mutual benefit, creative problem solving, these approaches enhance reality negotiation capabilities. Domination, exploitation, and zero-sum thinking interfere with the process. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just discovered technologies that transcended physical limitations, they had discovered technologies that required transcendence of ethical limitations as well. The power to reshape reality came with built-in safeguards that ensured it could only be used for beneficial purposes. As the session drew to a close, the assembled delegates found themselves facing a choice that would define the future of galactic civilization. They could maintain the existing order, accepting the limitations that had defined their species for millennia, or they could join humanity in exploring the possibilities that existed beyond those limitations. The choice, Zara said in her closing statement, is not whether to accept humanity as another member of galactic civilization. The choice is whether galactic civilization is ready to transcend the assumptions that have limited its potential for so long. She gestured to the holographic display one final time, showing not Earth or human technology, but a projection of what the galaxy could become if every species learned to work with reality as a collaborative partner rather than treat it as a constraint to be endured. The image was breathtaking: worlds restored to perfect ecological balance, civilizations that had achieved harmony between technology and nature, species that had transcended their biological limitations while maintaining their essential identity. It was a vision of a future where the word impossible had lost its power because everything that should be possible had become achievable. The invitation is open to all species, Zara concluded. Humanity has no desire to lead galactic civilization into this future. We simply want to help build it together with any species willing to explore what becomes possible when we stop accepting unnecessary limitations. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Not because every species agreed with humanity's approach, but because every species recognized that the alternative, remaining confined by limitations that had become optional, was no longer acceptable. The age of impossible limitations was ending. The age of collaborative reality was about to begin. And, at the center of it all, a young human engineer who had never learned to accept the word impossible, prepared to help the galaxy discover just how much was achievable when you treated reality as a conversation rather than a constraint. The greatest limitation the galaxy had ever faced, it turned out, wasn't technological or physical or even philosophical. It was the simple assumption that limitations had to be permanent. Humanity's greatest gift to galactic civilization wasn't their reality negotiation technologies or their transcendent capabilities. It was the demonstration that assumptions about what was possible were the only real barriers that had ever existed. Once those assumptions were removed, the universe became a much more interesting place to explore.